I read a 5-star book and I have so much to say about it, so let's get into this review. And for those of you who have read it, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts because for me, this was such a hard read and I know it touches a lot of us, especially because of the topics. So let me know what your thoughts were, message me, and let's talk. But getting into this review, I just finished A Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan, and like I mentioned, this was a 5-star read for me. This has to be the most beautiful, so well written story of loss, trauma, healing, finding yourself, all of the emotions as someone who is battling and living through domestic violence. So, if that's a trigger for you, please feel free to click out of this one. But the DV in this book, there was such a deep dive into what it was like for someone who is living through DV day in, day out in such an abusive relationship. My heart goes out to everyone and anyone who has to live through this on a day to day basis because I just cannot imagine what this is like for you. And I will say that Kennedy Ryan really did her thing with doing such a deep dive into DV and abuse and portraying a story that is really going to touch you in the deepest ways. It will literally break your heart apart and put it back together because Iris's story is just so beautiful. It is just amazing to see how she was able to get herself out of this life, out of this situation, and turn it around into something beautiful for herself and for her daughter. So, getting into a little bit about the book, Iris Dupree is the main character, and she is in a relationship with Caleb, who is her abuser, and he is utilizing all of his power to basically control every aspect of her life. He purposefully gets her pregnant, which also, again, is a way of trapping her into staying with him. He is making it so that she is relying on him for every aspect financially, where she's living, how she's living, her means of transportation, taking care of their daughter. It is just one thing after the next, and she is literally fighting for her life to get out of this home and get out of this relationship. And I don't even know where to start with August, but he is the knight in shining armor. He is her prince, who, from the moment they met, there was just like an instant connection that is just unmatched. And it was so beautiful to see that despite everything she's been through, despite having to take herself and her daughter out of the situation and really live in isolation for a year, he was still there dedicated to her and wanting to be with her despite whatever was going on in her life, despite where she was and who she may have been with or may not have been with. He was so dedicated to her and so in love with her. I absolutely fell in love with August myself because his character was just so powerful and so well written to match exactly what it is that Iris needed. Like I said, I can talk about this book for hours and hours and hours because it was just that good. I will admit that while I was reading it, I did have to take a break every now and then just because it was very graphic. And that is something to think about if you're considering reading Long Shot. It's very graphic, it can be very triggering, and the context of what you're reading is just so harsh, but also the reality for so many people. So I found myself having to take a break just because it was a lot. It was really, really heavy. It was a lot. And I found myself crying and I felt my heart breaking over and over and over again for Iris because this was so intense of a story. Like I mentioned, Kennedy Ryan's books will literally touch you in the best ways. It will break your heart apart and put it back together. Her stories are just so deep and so emotional, and everything that I look for in a romance. It is just so full of so much, and I absolutely love them. So, if you have not read any of her books, I highly recommend that you do. Kennedy Ryan's writing is just amazing, and I don't think you should start with Long Shot. Definitely start with something a little bit lighter, but eventually work your way up to it because this book was just so eye opening and it was just so motivating and so moving and so beautifully written. So, like I mentioned, this was definitely a 5-star read for me, and I highly, highly recommend it.